someone once sarcastically observed that Jesus came proclaiming the kingdom of God, but what he wound up with instead was the church. How well would you say the church has lived up to Christ's image for it? Is the church what it should be? What you believe God intends it to be? Even more pointedly, has church life ever frustrated you? Have you ever kept your distance from the church because it's not what it ought to be? Well, at whatever level, each of us here has obviously decided to make the church part of our lives. And wouldn't you like to be part of something truly great, God's vision for his church? Well, what is God's vision of the church, and how can we help make it a reality? What is the type of church God needs today and always? This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Pentecost Sunday, the day on the church calendar when we celebrate the so-called birthday of the church, the day following our Savior's return into heaven when he sent the gift of the Holy Spirit to his followers, and the work of the church as Christ's body in the world began. For our discussion today, our text is the parable of the great banquet. It's a somewhat odd story containing both very reassuring and quite disturbing elements. A story that, as with all of Jesus' parables, works on many different levels, but overall is simply the story of a party, specifically a wedding banquet given by a king for his son. Now, it's important to note that traditionally in New Testament imagery, when discussing a wedding, the groom is always meant to symbolize Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. The question then becoming, who is the bride? Well, again, traditionally, the bride is understood to be the church. That is, all those who have come to know the love of Jesus Christ and have given themselves in love to him in return. This is the marriage, if you will, between Christ and his church. As we sang in our opening hymn today, the church's one foundation is Jesus Christ, her Lord. She is his new creation by water and the word. From heaven he came and sought her to be his holy bride. Christ, the groom, the church, the community of believers, the bride. So in effect, you see our text today, the story of a wedding banquet, is Jesus' vision of the kingdom he is building, his goal for all creation, specifically focusing on the church's role in this as the precursor or the forerunner, preparing the way, working toward showing the way to the completed kingdom. What does Jesus tell us here about his vision for the church and how well we're doing with that? You know, a noted scholar once remarked that it is often said that the church is the bride of Christ. Well, if that's the case, then if Christ were to apply for a divorce on grounds of cruelty, adultery, and desertion, he would probably get one. Right? Too true. Yeah. What is Jesus' vision for the church, and how might we be part of fulfilling that to make the church what it ought to be? A few thoughts. First, God's vision of his church is that it is meant to be overwhelmingly joyful. Notice how the parable begins. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. The kingdom is a wedding banquet. Now, right off the top, let me mention a few things about wedding customs in ancient Palestine. A wedding back then was a veritable roof raiser. The wedding began with a huge feast in the evening. Then came the actual wedding ceremony. Next, the couple was led in a torchlight parade through the entire village. Crowns were placed on their heads and a canopy was carried over them. The parade ended at their new home, but really that's just when the party began. For the next 7 days, 24 hours a day, the wedding party and the open house continued. Even in that poverty-stricken society, a wedding was a time of extravagant joy. Jesus begins by comparing the kingdom, his church, to a wedding party in order to make this point, that the kingdom of God is joy unlimited. We Christians should be the most joyful folks on earth. After all, our past failures are forgiven. Our eternal future is guaranteed. The God of the universe loves us. His Son died for us. We are his sons and daughters, his princesses and princesses. Life cannot deliver any heartbreak or tragedy that his grace will not see us through. And God is going to have the final word with this world. Now that's worth celebrating, isn't it? You know? God intends for his church to be a community of overwhelming joy, pointing toward the perfect joy of the kingdom, a place that stands out in an often very depressed and fearful and angry world as being totally different, and thus it draws people to it. Sadly, however, let's admit it, we don't always look like people of joy, do we? We tend to drag into church like we're walking our last mile, right? And then we can't wait for it to be over. I mean, heaven forbid I go past an hour, right? You know, oh my goodness. Fate worse than death. We often come in here bugged and annoyed. We're often just as angry and fearful and nasty and depressed as anybody else out there. Sometimes even more so, you know. Why would anybody want that? You know, right? They can stay home. They can stay home and be miserable, right? And they do. Why does this happen? It happens because we forget. We forget what it's all about. How much is ours in Jesus Christ every moment of every day? How much we're loved unconditionally, unceasingly. Most especially, we lose sight of the fact that we don't deserve any of this. But it's all given to us anyway. The kingdom, the church, is supposed to be a wedding banquet. It's a tremendous party, a celebration of God's love. Each worship service itself is meant to remind us of this fact. Each worship service being itself something like a wedding ceremony itself. I mean, think about it. We were gathered here in the presence of the King. The candles are lit. The flowers are nicely arranged. The musicians have performed. We may not be in formal attire, but we're a little more formal than normal, you know. We're greeted by good friends. There's a feeling of warmth and fellowship in the place. We've opened the scriptures. Sometimes, if the children participate, we even have in effect flower girls and ring bearers, right, you know. We have given vows to the Lord in prayer and song. And following the ceremony, we even have a reception called coffee hour, right? You know? Yeah. A wedding is on, right? And what a celebration it is. And what are we celebrating? We are celebrating the King's great love for his Son and for each of us. When we forget this central fact, as we so often do, we become miserable and anxious and just plain nasty. And the whole thing for us and others, it just collapses. Church, first of all, is supposed to be overwhelmingly joyful, and this only happens when we consistently remember how much is ours in Jesus Christ. That while we don't deserve any of this, we are loved. And then to live in that joy. This is the foundation. Are we doing this, and will we do this? One author writes, "One morning at breakfast, I decided to teach my nearly 4-year-old son, Caleb, his first Bible verse, John 3:16. I slowly enunciated the words, 'For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life.' The second time I said the verse even slower, encouraging Caleb to fill in certain words. When I got to 'shall not perish, but have everlasting,' I left the last word blank so that Caleb could fill it in, which he did. Caleb proudly answered, 'Fun.' For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting fun." Right? I was about to correct Caleb when suddenly I realized that I couldn't have said it better myself. He had gotten it exactly right, and I just had to laugh. And with that, I chose to put away my worries and fears and annoyances for the day, and instead to simply celebrate the fun of being loved by God. God's vision for his church is, first of all, that it be overwhelmingly joyful. From this then, secondly, God's vision of the church is that it be profoundly transforming. You know, in the parable, the king, of course, has invited many guests to this great wedding banquet. So when the time came for the ceremony, the specific timing of ancient weddings not being pinned down as we have in modern times, but rather sort of being open-ended, well, the king sends a message to the invitees, basically saying, you know, soup's on, right? But what happened? Everybody begged off at the last moment. You know, can't come. They said, sorry, they added. Don't take it personally, right? They appealed. Those originally invited, those who at the outset said that they wanted to be there, ultimately refused the invitation and even turned on the king's messengers. This being generally taken to symbolize the Jewish people for whom the Messiah came, the original invitees, but who ultimately refused the party. The king understandably is outraged, and in his anger, he destroys all those who have refused. And understand, this is not meant to indicate God's rejection of the Jewish people, not at all. Quite the opposite. Realize the parable is not so much telling us about God as it is telling us about us. It's the reality before us. In this case, the destruction that happens in the parable being symbolic of what happens to anyone, Jew or Gentile, who refuses the invitation, that their lives are lost then in pain and death. Well, the original invitees have refused, but the king says to his servants, hey, the party's still on. Go out and hit the trails, beat the bushes, turn over the rocks, whatever crawls out, bring them in, right? You know? A reminder to us all, again, always, that when we refuse God's call upon our lives, that doesn't stop God's loving work. It simply means we miss out on it, Well, the servants go out and they get everybody they can without distinction, which is an issue we'll come back to shortly. But with the house now filled, the party's on, only with a new guest list, right? All seems like a happy ending. But then we get this really weird addendum, right? The king comes down and he finds this one guest who's not wearing a wedding robe. The king asks for an explanation, and the man has none. So the king has him bound, hands and feet, and throws him out. Talk about the fashion police, right? What gives? So someone at the wedding feast, wasn't properly dressed for the occasion. This shouldn't be surprising. They just grabbed this guy off the street, Was he supposed to be walking around in his formal attire in a tuxedo all the time or something? Why was the king so upset? Well, again, looking back to ancient customs, scholars tell us that in Jesus' times, kings often gave their guests fine robes to wear during their visit. That is, the king was not rejecting this person because he had worn the wrong clothes. The king would have willingly supplied the right clothes for the guest. Evidently, though, this guest had not felt it necessary to accept the king's offer of the fine robes. He had chosen to stay in his own common street clothes instead. And this is the point. That when we come to the wedding banquet of the Son, when we choose to accept the invitation and join in the party of the kingdom, the king offers us new clothes that we are expected to put on. It's the clothing of faith in Christ. As Paul says, put on Christ, That is, we must change. We must become new. Again, in the story, the king's anger is not a literal statement of God's nature. Rather, it is meant to serve symbolically to say that when we refuse to have all this actually change us, we painfully miss out on all that it has to offer us. We end up outside of it, But such it is with many. Every one of us at times. We often want to enjoy the feast of the kingdom, but we do not want to put on the new garment that God has for us, the garment of a new purpose for our lives, the garment of love for all people, the garment of personal responsibility, the garment of repentance and change, the garment of a new walk with God. We don't want any of this if it actually changes us, right? Simply put, do lives get changed here? If we come here every week, if we take all the time and energy to be part of all this, yet in the end, we each remain the same, then why do any of this, right? Once again, we could just as well stay home for that. Simply put, do our lives change because of this? God's vision of his church is, secondly, that it be profoundly transforming. The people, upon joining the party, they put on new clothes, the clothes of the wedding banquet. It is a church that proclaims that new life is possible and where its members continually seek to be made new in Jesus Christ. A church that says to everyone that it can that your life can be different today, that you are not trapped forever in the life that you've made for yourself. You can be new today. A truth, a vision that happens through members who themselves actively seek to continually be transformed into Christ. Members who continually say, Lord, today, every day, fix what's wrong in me. Each of us always aware of the ways we need to change and grow and being open to that. Is this us offering new life through living new lives? Or are we more often believing we're good enough as we are and only looking at how others need to change? And thus we're far from God, though seemingly so close. Think of it this way. The great biblical scholar, Fred Craddock, he tells of being invited by the Reverend Bill Coffin to preach at a New York's famed Riverside church. And in the phone call preceding Fred's visit, Bill said, since I'm not going to be there, why not stay at my apartment? It'll be convenient for you. I'll leave word with the super, just ring the bell and ask for the key, which worked. Although the place was apparently a little cluttered, Bill was single then and not much into housekeeping. Thankfully, there were notes everywhere, some of them on the floor, complete with arrows, bedroom here, bathroom down the hall, and so forth, including a note on the refrigerator which read, Fred, in case you're looking for breakfast, you won't find anything here, but they'll be happy to serve you breakfast at the church. Good, thought Fred, I'll be able to eat with the staff. And so Sunday morning, he grabbed his preaching robe and he walked a couple blocks to Riverside Church, which was when he saw the line of people clean around the block. Oh, that's so nice, Fred thought. They've heard I'm coming. Well, you know what it was? It was actually a line of homeless people waiting for breakfast, which was served in the big hall at long tables in big quantities at the church's soup kitchen. Sitting down with his food and somewhat, disappointed, but deciding to make the best of it, Fred figured he better make some conversation. And so he said to the man across from him, what brings you here? Booze, the man said. I loved it too much and drank it too long. Lost everything. Got into the habit of coming here for breakfast. Then I sobered up and I went to live with my daughter. She said I could stay as long as I was dry, but if I slipped, I had to go. She said she wouldn't have a drunk in the same house with her kids. Well, I slipped, so here I am. What about you? Where are you from? Georgia, Fred said. First time here? Asked the man. Yes, Fred answered. So what do you do? Inquired the man. Now, Fred wanted to say anything but the truth, but he said it anyway. I'm a preacher. Without batting an eye, the man replied, well, it takes all kinds, doesn't it? Right? I guess we all can slip and fall, right? You see, he just figured Fred was just another homeless guy, right? Of which Fred writes, I'll tell you what I wanted to say to him. I wanted to stand on a chair, clink my glass, get everyone's attention, and say to those 200 men, listen, you losers, I'm not one of you. I'm just here eating breakfast. In a few minutes, I'm going to be upstairs in one of the greatest pulpits in the country where I'll be grandly introduced, and then I will preach God's holy word. But I didn't say any of that. I had no right, you see. For it was suddenly clear to me that there was no distinction between them and me, because we are all in line for the kindness of others and the grace of God. We're all in line because we have slipped and fallen and need rebirth. And the church, in its best moments, is about exactly that. When I remembered that, I quit being annoyed and instead had the best meal I've had in years. God's vision for his church is, secondly, that it be profoundly transforming. Which leads us into third. God's vision for his church is that it be radically inclusive. Pastor Lamar Wadsworth of the First Baptist Church of Baltimore writes, 2 establishments in Baltimore do basically the same thing. Both prepare and serve food, and both provide a place for people to sit down and eat. Both are governed by the same health department regulations. One of these establishments is a soup kitchen at a rescue mission. The other is an elegant, expensive restaurant a few blocks away in Little Italy. While both do essentially the same thing, they are guided by an entirely different mission. The mission of the soup kitchen is to feed hungry homeless people. The mission of the expensive restaurant is to provide an enjoyable dining experience in a delightful atmosphere. Likewise, the church must decide what its mission is. Is it to provide an enjoyable religious experience for people who already know Jesus Christ and have their lives together? Or is it to respond to the needs of spiritually destitute people whose lives are in total chaos? Will we be a quaint little restaurant church, or will we be a soup kitchen church? The ultimate question before all of us, always, as Christ's holy church. Basically, are we a self-serving church or a servant church? Is all of this for the in crowd or for the out crowd? Returning to the text. As noted, once the original invitees refused the party, the king sent his servants out to grab people off the street. And note specifically the command that is given. Go, therefore, into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet. It's very important. Invite everyone you find, says the king, which the servants do, and the text notes. So those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. They gathered all, both good and bad, so the hall was filled. Now, as we just noted, the king discovers someone who should not be there. But notice, that's the king's job, not the servant's job, right? Their job was simply to gather people in, anyone they can, to fill the house. It's a crucial point. This is our job as the church, to fill the house of God. Not simply literally as to put people in the pews, but to get people to know that they are invited to the party, that the banquet of God's love is for them, making no distinction as to who that is. Sadly, let's face it, far too often we do the exact opposite. We think the king's job, God's job, is our job, namely to screen the guests, to decide who should be here and who should not, to serve as bouncers for the kingdom. Unfortunately, this is much of what passes for church in America today, but it is not church. It is, in fact, the exact opposite of church. Preacher Jim Cymbala, in his book, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, he puts it bluntly. He says, do you know what the number one sin of the church in America is? It is not the plague of immorality gripping our people, nor the absence of commitment. The number one sin of the church in America today is that its members are not on their knees every day crying out to God, bring us the drug addicted, bring us the sinners, bring us the destitute, bring us the gang leaders, bring us those with AIDS, bring us the people nobody else wants, whom only you can heal, and let us love them in your name until they are whole. Have you ever prayed for our church's growth? Have you ever prayed for St. John's growth? Well, in your prayers, have you ever prayed for God to bring us those that nobody wants? Those that maybe even you don't want, right? On your list, who's the chief of sinners? We've all got our list, right? Are you willing to pray for them to come into our church just as they are, that they might know God's love for them? Jesus' banquet is radically inclusive, and that happens when God's people resolve to welcome all unconditionally. God doesn't need any more exclusive clubs. He's got enough of them already, where the members are all the same and they're all very comfortable with one another. Let's face it, most of what passes for church growth nowadays is nothing more than shuffling the deck, right? Moving members from one church to another, people already in, right? It's like, have you ever heard the old joke about the three churches in a small town who pooled their efforts to sponsor a week-long revival meeting? After the revival, the pastors of the three churches gathered to compare notes. Our church did very well in the revival, the Baptist pastor noted. We gained 4 new members. We did even better, said the Presbyterian pastor. Our church gained 6 new members. Well, we did best of all, said the Methodist pastor. We managed to get rid of our 10 most troublesome members. Right? This is what often passes for church growth. Somebody gets annoyed and we move them around church to church, right? It's people already in. Well, how about instead of reaching the people who are in, how about reaching the people who are out? What Christ needs are radical churches, places where the people nobody wants, they find a place and they fit in. Far too often we think our job is to screen and to clean when our job is solely to invite. To let everyone we know know that as far as the King is concerned, they are welcome here, they're invited just as they are. To put it another way, this is all not supposed to be just for us. In the end, notice in the parable that the servants go out to bring people in. This again is the task of God's people, to go out and fill the house. That is, we all play every role in the parable at one time or another. Think about it. The person making excuses, the person refusing to change into the wedding clothes, the person not invited. But ultimately, when we get in on the party, when we really get in, we become servants, not guests. And we share in the party by offering the party. Just think for a moment about the work of a servant. Their job is never to focus on their own needs, but on somebody else's needs. This is what God asks of his people in the party. It's selflessness. That it not simply be for us, but our living far more, thinking of others' needs, out in the world seeking to get others in. To put it another way, the Feast of the Kingdom, the wedding banquet of the Son of the King, is ultimately a takeout meal. Right? It's not just for me, it's for me to take out to somebody else. In the end, is this all for us? Or are we living to get somebody else in, to get the love of Jesus Christ to someone else who doesn't know about it, looking to their needs, not our issues? God's vision for his church is finally that it be radically inclusive, members selflessly going out for others, a church that exists for those not in it. A vision we enact by resolving each and every day to not simply live for our own needs, but to make sure we get someone else to know that they are invited to the kingdom today. A guest who is yet to be invited. Is this us? In closing, consider this real-life example. One author reflects. Faith Inspirational Missionary Baptist Church has adopted its local high school, the roughest in a rough city. 40% of the students at Centennial High School in Compton, California, are from either a group home or a foster home. Such students don't have any adult who will cheer for their football team. When 2 of the Faith Inspirational members volunteered to help coach the football team, they were appalled at the state of the locker rooms, and so they organized their church to refurbish them and to paint them. One of the young men on the football team who was required to help in the project turned to the lady next to him and asked her why she was painting his locker room. The church member simply replied, "Because I love you." "No one loves me," was his skeptical response. At that, The woman set down her paintbrush and went over to the young man and hugged him. "No one has hugged me in 7 years," the young man replied, not knowing exactly what to do with this woman. But she wasn't done yet. She called over a dozen other women, and they lined up to hug this young man, to kiss him on his cheek and to tell him how special he was to God and that he had a destiny. And the young man just wept and wept. After that, Pastor Rafer Owens, who is also a police officer in Compton, arranged teams of adults to adopt each football player and to go to their games to cheer for them so that they can each know how special they are to God. And these young men are finding Jesus Christ because the church is presenting him so well and because this church went out to bring them in. Jesus Christ came proclaiming the kingdom of God, but what he wound up with instead was the church. How well has the church lived up to Christ's image for it? God's vision for his church was something overwhelmingly joyful, profoundly transforming, and radically inclusive. This Pentecost morning, let us each resolve to live that vision. Christ's holy church can be today what it is meant to be always. We need only make it happen. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 539, O Spirit of the Living God. Would you please stand?